meeting of Ignite CDA Coeur d'Alene's Urban Renewal Committee, and please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Have to tell him to turn the light on.
Before we start, I would like to, because there's a big crowd here from Midtown, I would like to get a motion to just modify the agenda to move Midtown discussion up to right after approval of the minutes, just so that they don't have to wait here that long.
I'd so move, Mr. Chairman.
Second?
Second?
Moved and second, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thanks. So now is the time for public comment. Any public comment? Please speak your name and address.
My name is David Lyons. I live at 839 North 2nd Street.
Thanks.
David Lyons, 839 North 2nd Street in Midtown. On November 2016, you hired appraiser Stan Moe to appraise the flea market. His November 9th appraisal said $320,000 for the flea market land and building. He defended that and stuck with it in a letter 2 days later. There are also 4 bare lots there. No appraisal's been done of them, but the assessor last July assessed those 4 lots at $60,000, $48,000, $48,000, and $48,000, for a total of $204,000. Adding the $320,000 for the flea market, that's about $525,000. Market value of that property. Idaho Code Section 50-2011A prohibits your agency from selling any of that property to a private party for less than its, quote, fair value, unquote. In accordance with that legal requirement, your RFP for Midtown specifically said that any sale price would, quote, in no case be less than fair value, unquote. The one proposal you've received offers $150,000 for all that property, worth $500,000 or more. It's obviously a lowball offer. I don't blame them for trying. That's just shrewd business. Send the other side a lowball offer, see if they're dumb enough or desperate enough to bite. The offer should have been rejected out of hand because it so obviously does not comply with your RFP's price requirement. Nor does it comply with your RFP's requirement that the proposal set forth with specificity what's proposed to be built there. Floor plans, site plans, building elevations, all that sort of stuff. The fact that it's been distributed for discussion here today, even though it plainly does not comply, suggests that, to me at least, that the offer group may not have been so far off on the desperate part of it. But in any event, don't be desperate to just do something, anything, just so you can say you've done something, regardless of what it is, just so you can avoid the embarrassment of not getting any serious proposals. There have been 10 years of failure of your agency on that property. It's time to give someone else a chance. Time to give a chance to someone that's good at this and that the public trusts. It's time to transfer this property to the city. The city where the city council and mayor are our elected representatives, accountable to us because they face election. They're not appointed. And so they're responsive and transparent. They serve the public, not themselves. The offer group says it's going to just sit on the property for several years and then figure out what to do. And in the meanwhile, have concerts or movie nights or that sort of thing. Well, the property is going to revert to the city several years anyway. The city is very good at doing that kind of stuff. Farmers markets, movie nights, just go to McEwen Park, go to City Park, any day during the warm weather. All kinds of stuff going on there. So it's time to transfer this property to the city. Let the city handle it. We trust the city because they're open and responsive to us. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment? Hearing none, next on the agenda is the approval of the last month's board meeting minutes, please.
I move we approve the December 20th, 2017 board meeting minutes.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any further discussion, corrections, additions? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thanks. And now we'll hear from the Midtown group. Tony, you want to?
Sure, just a kind of, as a way of introduction, as you recall, the RFPs for Midtown were due January 12th. We received one proposal from Chad Oakland, Dan Stubbs, and the Capones for the Midtown property. You have seen a copy of that proposal, and I've invited the proponents to come here tonight to visit with the board to answer any questions you might have and to discuss the proposal.
Hello, Chad Oakland, 2022 North Government Way, Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, 83814. We did make a proposal. Thank you, Mr. Lyons, for introducing that. Let's just start off by saying I get where he's coming from. The LCDC has owned majority of this dirt since 2003. You acquired the Paris Flea Market, I think, in 2010, and it's just been kind of what's going on. I know that people are trying to do affordable housing and mixed use, and just nothing never seemed to come off the ground. I was born and raised in Midtown area. Midtown has been in transition since 1974 when I was born, just like East Sherman. I think if everyone's trying to force people to do stuff, I think that natural growth, housing, it's going to fix itself organically. The Midtown property is sitting there. We have sheets, if you guys want to see them. I went and walked that and let me hand this out to you guys. I did make one mistake, sorry.
First one you ever made?
Thank you.
Excuse me. I did make a mistake. The building that currently junk is in, I marked that as vacant. That is incorrect. I heard junk had taken over the former local color building. I thought they were going to go in there, but it seems they're using both of the buildings currently. But you see downtown is a mix right now of there's some vacancies as anywhere. Thrift stores, antique stores, you got one grocery store and residences and a couple different restaurants, bars kind of intermixed. Our idea was to get the property and not be forced to start construction in 6 months, because what will happen is you'll be forced to take something to the complete maximum density to make any sense of it. The Capones, who we partnered up with this, if we get somewhere with this, is they've been in Midtown for 25 years. They're a great proponent and a great helper of Midtown growth. Where our thought was maybe, and I wanted to correct something, the city does not hold the Live at 5. The city does not do these. These are other entities that lease the dirt and get permits to use the city park in Midtown, I believe. I don't think the city puts them on. But we want to help create more activity, get some more growth to Midtown. Maybe you have some festivals, maybe you have a concerts. We don't even know that yet. Our proposal was to leave it as is for 2 to 3 years and kind of get an idea what is going to happen and kind of see the market could dictate. It might turn out into be something great and we just leave it alone. We would be okay with giving a date for how long it needs to be. If it's 2 or 3 years, I think we'd have to talk about it, but we're okay with it. But we would like to do something. I mean, I'm born and raised here. My grandparents still live downtown. I love Coeur d'Alene. And I don't want to take anything to max density. I don't want to ruin it. I think every change is the only thing that keeps changing. And we want to do something that's nice. It's just, I think having to make a decision to start something in 6 months is tough when no one can figure out what to do there for 14 years. So, I don't know if you guys have any questions of me or...
Opened up for questions. Discussion.
Danielle, if we did turn this property over to the city, just hypothetically, because ultimately it's going to revert to the city, what is the parameters for the city to then dispose of the property, should they choose to, say, a private developer?
The city doesn't really have the ability to dispose of it to a private developer other than the same way that you would through the determining it to be, I'm blanking on the word, surplus property. Right. So, I mean, that, Tony and I talked before the meeting, and my feeling is that this proposal probably isn't adequate to dispose of the property under 50/20/11 because you don't know what they're going to do with it. So there's no way to do a fair use valuation. Because if, depending on what the development was proposed to be, $150,000 might be the right number, or $500,000 might be the right number. It depends, you have to make a determination of what you have to sell the land for and enable them to make whatever development that they've proposed that you've deemed to be, to the benefit of the public and in compliance with the plan, work.
Right.
And so here, where we don't know what they're going to do, I don't think that you would be able to accept a proposal that was less than the fair market value. I think you would want to go through the surplus property to the extent that you could move forward a number of different ways. You could seek proposals again, see if you could get something more definitive. Maybe these guys would provide something more definitive with more time. Or you could go through what we've done with surplus property and deem it surplus and then get an appraisal and put it out to the market.
Great, thanks. That's what I was trying to get to.
Any other questions? Thank you, Mr. Copeland.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, guys.
If you remember from our last discussions and stuff, no board action is necessary tonight. We just, we were talking about opening the bid packets tonight and then creating an ad hoc committee to develop a plan to bring back to the board. And because there was just one, we decided to hear from them. And so we'll discuss it further. Correct? Tony?
Yeah, you can take it under advisement.
So what did you say? You want to discuss it, Mr. Chairman, or we're going to discuss it at another meeting? I'm just asking.
Good question.
Okay.
Do we want to discuss it further now?
Well, it appears to me that, based upon what Danielle says, is we could not accept the bid as it currently stands.
Correct.
So it appears that we don't have an adequate bid at this point in time. So I guess that's our option is just to do nothing at this point.
Well, or,
Discuss how to move forward.
yeah, discuss that, declare it surplus and put it up for sale.
We could do that.
Surplus property.
So if the board wanted to do that, you would direct me to go ahead and get appraisals and get the process started, where we can come back at the February board meeting and kind of share with you what the appraised value is for the property up there, and then you can decide whether you want to go ahead and do the surplus process or another venue.
Mr. Chairman, is the last appraisal you had on the Paris Flea Market valid then for if we wanted to declare surplus? You wouldn't have to go back out again, would you?
Well, it was over a year old, so I don't know what the shelf life would be.
Probably see an update, though,
Yeah.
to hold the cost down.
Yeah.
And then we haven't had the bare lots appraised in years and years and years, so we really don't know the fair market value of those. So that would be.
Might make sense to know the fair market
Oh,
value of
absolutely.
those.
Now, there's 4 vacant lots there? 3 vacant lots?
Well, it's a combination of 4.
The bare land, one in the middle.
Yeah, the bare
It's
lands,
2
yeah.
lots then?
It's actually, it's got 4 addresses. It's kind of a funky layout.
Mr. Chairman, for now, should we form that ad hoc committee to come back to the board with a recommendation? Maybe a committee of people can meet between now and our February meeting and come back with a recommendation?
With information.
with information.
Well, 'cause-
Was that a motion?
well, can I,
Yes, ma'am.
it sounds like we have essentially, what I've heard is three options. Declare it surplus, go out with the RFP again, or essentially do nothing. I mean, based on the results of what we got from our first RFP. So I personally would rather not do all this work about surplus and not do anything else. I kind of agree, I do agree with the mayor that it would be a good idea to put a group together to talk about it, get more information about the three different options or whatever it is that we need to do so that we can make a recommendation rather than just assuming that because we only got one RFP that we either do nothing or consider it surplus.
And we could come back. February is probably too soon to come back. Maybe it's March. Maybe we need to take that RFP and be more specific. Maybe it was, I think we thought initially that we wanted to be very broad in what we had to give anyone a chance to come forward. Maybe we need to try to pin down something to be a little bit more specific, if that's the route we choose to go.
Can I address the group, or is that period gone, or?
He's one of the proposers.
Pardon?
Why not? He's
Yeah.
one of the proposers.
Yeah, you can come forward and name and address, please.
Yeah, absolutely. Dan Stubbs, 4878 East Annapolis Court, Coeur d'Alene, 83814. So speaking from the developer side, one of the problems with that RFP is you're saying, okay, come forward with a full set of working plans, drawings, bid, proposal. You're talking about doing that in a 6-month timeframe. The city of Coeur d'Alene is actually pretty easy to work with as far as stuff like that, but there's no way you're going to come up with that in 6 months. And to go out and to go spend $20,000, $30,000 on a full set of renderings, working drawings, whatever it is you're asking for on an RFP like that, that's a non-starter. As a developer, who would consider doing that? We would never spend that kind of money until we had the dirt tied up. And so to think that you're going to get an RFP, put it out there, and get a bunch of developers to come forward with all kinds of, working concepts and drawings and plans on what may or may not be possible in this thing, and then actually construct it in 24 months, I think that's pretty, I don't see that actually possibly happening. Additionally, you're in a setting where cost of materials is going up, interest rates are going up, and so when you start looking at proposals and all sorts of projects like that, time is obviously of the essence. And so to go, when there's other stuff that is that actually can just be sold, that you can go buy and you can go participate in as a developer, to go spend a bunch of money on something that may or may not happen, that's been spinning around for 14 years plus, which is why I believe we're probably the only proposal. And I know, and I guess speaking from my banking side, I think that's great that somebody appraised that building at $300,000. That building is functionally obsolescent. The thought that you would get $300,000 for that building when you have one right across the street that's going into foreclosure right now, that's going to be up for sale next month for a fraction of that price. I think that if, I guess the only way to find out what really the market will bear is to put it up for sale. The Midtown area, there's a lot of possibility, but I just don't see until some more pieces fill in that you're going to get $500,000 for that dirt.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate the time.
Could I ask Dan a question really quick?
Yeah.
So back in the old days, before Armageddon hit and the economy crashed, we did an RFP and we had a number of proposals, and they had some drawings, now probably not engineered drawings or anything like that. They had some drawings and some things like that. They made presentations. So unfortunately, after we selected somebody, then things kind of turned with the economy and it didn't
Right.
work. Then we went to Idaho Housing and all that happened.
I've seen those drawings.
Yeah, so where's the middle ground here if we did do another RFP, and just trying to get a concept from someone, and pick you know,
Yeah, maybe
pick a
some-
winning idea, I guess, maybe. I'm just
Yeah,
kind of
maybe
exploring
some-
the avenues.
maybe some concept sketches, but that's not what your current RFP asks for, and to come and to say, get a full set of working, plans and models and stuff like that, it's a lot of money.
Well, I'm just asking,
Yeah,
maybe the
so,
language wasn't quite tailored right in there.
Yeah.
All right.
Mr. Chairman?
Just for
I was gonna say-
clarification, so what the RFP asks for is preliminary concept development plans.
So, yeah, I'm not sure where the full rendering engineered drawing stuff came from, so that's.
Well, yeah.
The
it's just-
concept.
Yeah. No, yeah.
Okay, thanks.
All right, thanks.
Thank you, Dan.
Mr. Lyons?
Thank you. Actually, the RFP asks for a lot more than that. Give me a second and I'll find it.
I can read it, I have it.
I
pulled up
have,
right here.
I have it here, thank you. On page 3, under 6, the proposer shall, quote, "submit a cover letter which outlines the relevant details of the development proposed to be constructed on the property, including but not limited to type of use to be conducted, business plan, size of structure, basic design, including one or multiple story configuration," and then 2 bullet points down, preliminary concept development plans, including concept site plan, floor plans, and building elevations. The Stan Moe appraisal in November 2016 was done under the current C-17 zoning for all best and possible uses, and you couldn't get any better. You hired him, he came in at $320,000 for the flea market alone. The other 4 lots, the assessor's numbers alone, which are typically less than market value, at $204,000. So to say that under any possible reading of anything, $150,000 could be a fair use is, with all due respect, absurd. I didn't hear any mention of the other possibility, which I mentioned, which is transferring this to the city, since it will revert to the city in several years anyway. And this group, with all due respect, they're quite honest about it. They say they're not going to do anything there for several years. So why sell it to them now and let them sit on it? You can sit on it for several years, or you can transfer it to the city and let the city do something with it sooner than several years. Thank you.
So,
Or we can sell it, so.
right. So all I wanted to say, so rightly or wrongly, I was one of the proponents of doing this RFP. Maybe the language needs to be tweaked. I don't know. I thought the economy had picked up and it'd be interesting to see what would happen again. So I think we're all thinking the same way. I don't think anyone's planning to sell this for that price tonight. I don't think that's workable. I think Chad and Dan's group are local people and have done some nice projects, but
No question.
so it's nothing against you. I just don't know that we can make this work under these circumstances. I personally don't feel any desperation to get rid of this property and do something. We've had it this long, and part of urban renewal, back in the day when we bought this, we weren't looking at this as private developers. We were looking at a burned-out 2-story building that had been sitting there, and we bought that, and then we bought some ghetto dilapidated, boarded-up buildings that was an old cafe and a bar there. So if nothing else, we've accomplished taking that slum and blight out of the Midtown and putting in a nice-looking park in there for right now. Maybe the park's going to be longer term, I don't know. So I don't think it's a bad deal to sit on it for a while, maybe have a committee look at restructuring another RFP or just make some recommendations to us. I don't see any reason to transfer it to the city right now because I think we got more flexibility to do something with it. Eventually it'll go to the city if we don't do something, but. So that's my 2 cents, just sit on it for now. It's a beautiful looking piece of property and kind of regroup and have a committee look at some alternatives, whether we do another RFP or what they think. But we've accomplished something by eliminating slum and blight up there.
Tony, do we have to have board action to not accept one proposal?
I don't think so. I mean, you'd have to take board action to accept it, so.
So I'm hearing, oh, go ahead.
Well, I guess since I wasn't part of the earlier discussion and decision process, I guess I'm wondering why, well, I guess what is the goal here? Is it to generate, funds like we're going to sell those other lots and then put it into something else? Or is it that we wanted to, me, wanted to be able to control what goes in there? It just seems like kind of the most obvious thing is why wouldn't you get an appraisal and, see about putting it up for sale and generate whatever is fair on it? Or is the point that, no, it's not really the money, it's the use of it? That's what my...
Yeah, good
I'm
question
wondering.
there.
As an old timer, let me answer that. There was two things. One was eliminate slum and blight, because it was ghetto in that half a
Yeah,
block
and
right
that's,
there.
it looks great.
And
Yeah, okay.
so we did that, and then we're trying to do something along with the street redevelopment project and so forth. We're trying to do something with that property that built community and created synergy there and put people there to support the businesses and the restaurants and created activity there and was good for Midtown. So, long story short, the economy changed, things have happened, and, it hasn't worked out. So I'm personally fine if we decide to sell the property and put it on the open market, update the appraisal. I wouldn't feel comfortable doing that until we at least had a chance for the Midtown people to maybe testify how they felt about putting it on the open market or what their feelings were on it after we've gone so far down the road with it. But
And who do you mean by the mid-time people?
anyone in the neighborhood that wants
okay.
to talk about
Okay.
what's done with it, I would think, personally, I would think if we were going to go ahead and just put it on the open market and do an appraisal, I'd probably want to hear from them first, before we made a decision. But I don't know if the long-term use is to stay as parkland as it is and eventually revert to the city, or we do another RFP or so forth. But I don't feel desperation. I'm not trying to find anything we can do. We did it to eliminate slum and blight and help Midtown. I think we accomplished that. We're just,
I think when we put the sod there, we were very careful in saying it was green space and not park.
okay. Yeah, if Deanna
thing
was here,
Deanna's not here.
she'd be on me for saying that, so.
So
it's,
then
I guess it's a green
create
space,
an ad
whatever
hoc
you want to
committee
call it.
to
I'm sorry,
back
but
with some information for the board?
I move that we develop an ad hoc committee to review the Midtown property for future opportunities.
I'll second that. Oh,
Oh, no,
You wanna-
no,
you want
go
that
ahead.
second?
No,
Moved
you
and
can second.
seconded. Further discussion?
all right.
I would volunteer to be on that ad hoc committee if
Okay.
appropriate.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
You need to be on there.
Motion carries. Thanks.
Do you want to appoint that committee now?
I think
Volunteers?
these
I
two
think we
should
have
be.
a chairman that already raised her hand first.
I'll be on the
Olivia,
committee
you
too.
bet.
Sarah, Olivia, and one more?
I'd like to be,
Yeah, I'd love that.
Steve? Okay,
One more? We need one more or three?
three's fine.
Perfect.
Everybody.
In March timeframe-ish? Because I don't think there's any,
By
we're
the
not in
March
a
board
hurry, so.
meeting?
Yeah.
Could have some information.
Okay.
Perfect. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Next would be the reviewing the draft of the annual report.
After the annual report, let me kind of get squared up here. So just to give background to everybody on the 2017 Ignite CDA Draft Annual Report, there was a change in the urban renewal law back in the summer of 2011 that now requires the agency to accept public comment on the annual report prior to the submittal to City Council. So we've developed the following process. The draft 2017 annual report to council was posted on the Ignite CDA websites last week. A public notice ran in the Coeur d'Alene Press a week prior to this meeting, indicating that the board would accept public comment on the annual report at this meeting, and that it would be a discrete agenda item. We will give an overview of the draft annual report prior to public comment, which I will do right now. If I can make that bigger or not. I think hopefully the folks at the and home can see that.
So Tony, was there any written comments?
There was no written comments. So I'll go through this, and then we can see if there's any public comment. So, the first page just kind of shows you an overview of the report, and as you know, if I've sent this all out to you, you've probably seen it, so just to go through it quickly. Overview of the report. This is our strategic priorities and our tactical goals for this fiscal year to help address those tactical, the strategic priorities. We've had some transition in our board. We lost 2 fine commissioners, Mr. Davis and Mr. Druffel. And we brought on board 3 fine commissioners, Mr. Chapkus, Mr. English, and Ms. Garcia. The report then goes into update several of the initiatives for the agency, downtown parking facility, our property divestitures and proposed property exchanges. We talk about the Atlas Mill site initiative, the Performing Arts feasibility study, the Four Corner Master Plan, the Higher Education Campus Initiative with the Collaborative Education Facility coming online, well, at least the construction beginning this calendar year. Midtown Placemaking, North Idaho Centennial Trail Foundation, our partnership, and the current Memorial Field projects. Talk about Urban Land Institute, bringing those programs to Coeur d'Alene. And then I just touched on some of the ongoing projects that we have with Riverstone West Phase 2, the lake apartments, which have broken ground across the street and are coming out of the ground. Talked about the Collaborate project, which is kind of sitting idle at this time. Salty Way revitalization that everybody's up to speed on, is well done. Riverstone West, again, talk about our partnership with the Coeur d'Alene Downtown Association and the sidewalk partnership that we have that's kind of been on hold for a little while. I think that might be coming back this calendar year. Communication and outreach, key partnerships, and then we talk about our strategic portfolio, list our board membership, and then an exhibit, we list the property in our strategic property portfolio that we have, and then the year-end balance sheet and the income statement from our FY17 fiscal audit. That's the overview of the report. And any questions you might have, anybody?
No questions? So now we would open it for public comment to discuss the annual report for 2017. Any public comment?
Somebody just need a motion to accept it and authorize me to submit it to City Council.
To accept the 2017 annual report.
A second.
And second, further discussion. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you very much. Motion carries.
In the process I've used in the past, and I think if the mayor would still want me to, I'd make a presentation to City Council. I'd share the report with City Council, then arrange to come and visit with the City Council in February or March to present it.
Yeah, that works. Thanks, Tony. Next on the agenda, we will hear from Commissioner Arman on our finances.
Yeah, let's look at the finances for December. We'll start out with the Lake District balance sheet. The Lake District experienced $245,068 increase in cash assets from November month end. Other assets, the Lake District 2016 Series Note Reserve account had $27 of earned interest for the month of December. Liability and fund balances, mortgages and notes payable line items showed a decrease of $6,067 for December, which represents a standard month of debt service. All other liability parameters were either unchanged or normal for the month, including the 2% credit to the due to arts line item. In the Lake District P&L, the Lake District received $452,029 in tax increment revenue from the county in December. Agency-funded initiatives were the downtown parking garage line item for $110,817. Memorial Park Four Corners line item, $54,745. Miscellaneous project one line item of $5,776 is for Welsh Comer's work on the Tilford Lane project. Other P&L items were taxes and increment payment line of $16,638 for property taxes paid to the county. All other P&L expenditure line items were normal within the operating month. For the River District, the balance sheet, assets, the River District experienced $391,721 decrease in cash assets from November month end due primarily to the payments on the Celtics Way revitalization project. All other assets were unchanged. In the liabilities and fund balance, all liability parameters were either unchanged or normal for the month, including the 2% due to the yards. In the River District, P&L, River District experienced a $107,177 in tax increment revenue from the county in December. Agency-funded program line item reflects a $479,383 payment made on the Celtics Way project. Professional fees line item includes $10,625 paid to Welsh Comer for their planning on the Atlas Mill site, and all other expenditures were normal for the month. So that is the financial report for the month of December. Moving on to payables.
Nick's already got a copy.
So the payables for December here in January, starting with some of the legal payments. $120 was paid to Elam and Burke, $40 for legislative issues, and then $80 for some legal work on the Atlas Stimson Mill site. Holly Troxel had $2,947. That breaks out to $1,649 for legislative and legal issues, general legal issues, of which $142 was for public records. And the other portion was $1,298 for legal work on the Park Drive Initiative and Railroad right-of-way in Midtown. We paid $8,000 in December for Hoover Accounting for 2017 fiscal year audit. We had a payment of $6,959.70 paid to Welsh Comer Engineers for the potential Tilford Lane property exchange. The Celtics Way project was in full roll. We had two payments there, $29,600 for Welsh Comer Engineers for construction phase services, and $249,635.37 to contractor T. La Riviere Equipment and Excavation. Also, we had payment of $2,250 to Miller Stauffer for the parking garage design. And last but not least, we had $12,228 paid to on the North Park subdivision. And was that to Welsh Comer?
Yes.
That was Welsh Comer, okay. So that was the payments for December. Total payments, $311,740.07 for the month of December.
Thank you, sir. Take some board action.
Well, I just had a question, again, part of my education process on the property tax payment. So we are not tax exempt, or is this like a nonprofit where if we have some that is used for business work?
We're not tax exempt.
That's right.
Okay. So in general, if it's just bare land or something not generating like a commercial income,
Right.
then it's exempt, but if we
Are
rent-
leasing it to a
Yeah.
for-profit entity, then we have to pay tax. And that's a change that happened, what, last year?
2 years ago.
2 years ago.
Okay, and just a quick snapshot, what do we have that we generate income on? Is it some
Not
local-
much anymore. Most of them have been demolished, so we have the 301 Lakeside property, which is where the Greek restaurant building. Then we have the 311 Lakeside, which is the old Doug's Muffler Shop, which is just up the
Right.
street. And then we have the 823 North 4th Street
That-
property,
Yeah,
and that's about it.
okay.
Motion to approve finances and payables?
I move that we approve the December financials and payables.
Moved and seconded. Further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Commissioner Ernie. You're welcome. Commissioner Jordan, can you talk to us about parking, please?
Okay, Mr. Chairman, on the City Parking Commission, I don't have a lot to report, but the fourth quarter, the parking revenues from the various lots in the downtown area, they had their highest fourth quarter ever, $87,000. The previous highest quarter was, fourth quarter was $65,000. part of the reason for that increase is the rates were raised at Independence Point, and that's been a considerable part of it. As far as the parking team for the parking garage, if you can listen closely in the downtown, you can hear banging from the pile driver, and they're driving sheet piles around to reinforce the streets and the sidewalk right now, where the lower level's going to get dug out. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Tony, at the same time they're driving piles in one place, I think Avista and Frontier are moving lines and poles over on the alley there, so that's coming along. So, took a little longer to get started than we were hoping, but we're off and running now.
Big equipment's moved in.
Yep.
The big unknown is how fast those piles will be driven. It's a very sandy site, so they're anticipating those piles are going to go in pretty quick. So that should hopefully accelerate the project.
Everything's sandy downtown.
Anything else?
Not really, unless there's any questions.
I can talk about the next item, if you'd like me to, the construction. It's construction materials testing for a parking garage project, the Strata proposal. So on Ignite CDA's behalf, Miller Stauffer was contacted by 3 firms in the area regarding third-party materials testing work relating to the parking garage project. This third-party testing is critical to assuring quality control on key project elements. For example, testing observations on subgrade work, compaction testing, cast-in-place concrete testing, post-tension concrete testing, masonry, and structural steel. 3 proposals were received. One proposal to Miller Stauffer was from Strata. For this work was $39,252. All West Engineering submitted a proposal for $55,308. And Intermountain Materials and Testing submitted a proposal with a fee of $77,930. Miller Stauffer Architects recommends that the agency select the Strata proposal for the third-party testing. And I think Mike Walker is here. He was, oh, there he is. In case you might have any questions, he's the architect with Miller Stauffer, if you have any questions about this.
Is it normal to see that big a discrepancy between the high and the low on something like this? That is major.
I would have to ask Mike. If you could come up, I don't know about third-party testing that much.
So to answer your question, the discrepancy when they do material testing is based on a per visit deal, and that is controlled between the owner and the contractor. So if, and they've in their proposal lined out what those per trip cost depending on what they're testing, whether it's concrete or structural steel or what have you. And so what we've asked them to do, because you guys don't generally want to know what the per trip costs, you want to know what's the overall cost.
Right.
Well, they try to make their best educated guess on how many trips it's going to take through the course of the construction to do that. And so some of the proposers estimated higher than others. So that's why there's the discrepancy.
But it's basically the same outcome. I mean, the same amount of work, but it's just, I mean, to really look at the difference in pricing here is astounding.
Yeah. And it's, one is probably more conservative than the other.
But the outcome that we desire will be okay with the lower bid. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, because it's, you know, for example, say through the course of construction, whatever the work that Tila Riviere is working on requires one extra trip for them to do that, but there's one less trip on a different testing. And so it's kind of fluid in how that kind of goes up and down, and it's called by the contractors, the one that does the calling. And what we've asked them is to meet the requirements to certify, or not certify, but make sure that we're meeting the quality level that we expect. If we aren't, then we test a little bit more. If we are, then we test a little less. Does that make sense? So for example, if when they're doing their excavation and they do a couple tests and we find that the soil capacity isn't quite up to what we thought it would be, we may excavate a little bit more, have them do another test, and then we get that.
But what we're choosing tonight is a flat bid contract. It's not a variable contract, correct?
It is a variable contract because it's based on trips. What we've asked them is to estimate how many trips they think that they will need to come
So
out and test.
hypothetically, the higher bid might actually be what it turns out to be if the number of trips works out to what they estimated it would be.
Potentially, but we generally control that, so we would make sure that they wouldn't go that high.
Okay. I just saw the difference there, and it was kind of like, okay, well, that's quite a difference. And, you know,
The other thing
we're
that-
asking for the same thing from all three different companies, and it's quite a difference in price.
The other thing is Strata did the initial soil testing when we did the soils report. So they had a little bit more knowledge of what that site is than the other companies. So I'm guessing that played a little bit into it. They, said, well, we don't need to do as much soil testing because we already did a bunch of testing, so we already know what that is. We did provide that report to the other companies, but I'm sure the other companies had to build a little bit more time to verify, so they gain a level of comfort with what Strata had already done.
Okay, great, thanks.
Olivia?
They answered my questions. It was about the variation in cost if it could move, but.
Thank you.
Just a note that we need to keep that under that $50,000 threshold because we didn't go through the formal bidding process for those three. So something to keep in mind when you're controlling those costs.
Right.
Okay, so we need a motion, right, Tony? So I'd make a motion that we hire Strata to do the testing.
I would second that.
Moved in second. Any further discussion?
I'd note that our architect was confident in the abilities of Strata to perform the job and hold the cost in line.
We put a limitation in their costs of 50. up to
Would it not exceed
Uh,
50,000?
Does not exceed.
Cost in no case to exceed $50,000.
All in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed? Thank you. Motion carries. Mr. Burns, Executive Director's Report.
Chairman, first item is Resolution 1802, which is destruction of select semi-permanent and temporary public records. This is at least the second time, maybe the third time we've done this. We come here once a year with a resolution that pertains to destruction of public records per the agency's public record retention policy. Temporary public records are documents and statements dated prior to October 2015. They're usually held for 2 years. Semi-permanent public records, documents and statements dated prior to October 1st, 2012, they're held for 5 years. Permanent records are never destroyed. So this is following our public records retention policy per the statutes that lay out, this is laid out in Idaho Code. And as a caveat, we run the semi-permanent records by the Idaho State Historical Society to see if they have any interest in saving any of these, and to date, they have not. So I'm not thinking they will this year either, but we will do that. So I just need a motion for the resolution to,
Just ask a question, just
Yep.
from a curiosity standpoint. How are the records stored, and where are they stored until the time they're destroyed?
the records are stored at the chamber building,
Okay.
and most of them are secured in locked cabinets in the basement
Okay.
of the chamber building.
Okay, just curious, like I
Bet.
said.
Good question.
Do I want to go look at them?
And I don't know how this pertains, but, a lot of the information is posted on our website.
Right.
It's in electronic form, the permanent
Just
records.
responsible for destruction of records too, so I just was curious.
Mr. Chairman, I guess a question probably for Danielle. So if we're talking about permanent records, semi-permanent, and temporary, I would imagine in the law there, it describes what there's, maybe just for my education, maybe others that may not know, what really are examples of those type of records?
So Ignite has a policy that was adopted in 2015 to address this, and the definitions track what's in the statute. It's found in 74-101. And so permanent records are meeting minutes, ordinances and resolutions, building plans and specifications, end-of-the-year financial reports, real property title, and bond documents. Other things like bylaws and stuff would fall into that category. And they have to be retained in perpetuity. Semi-permanent records include claims, canceled checks, warrants, contracts, license applications, departmental reports, and other records deemed semi-permanent. And then and those have to be maintained for 5 years. And then and to destroy them, you have to adopt the resolution. You have to have me review what's going to be destroyed. For temporary records, they can be destroyed after 2 years, and that's like building applications, plans, specifications, cash receipts, subject to audit, like public records requests, bankruptcy notices, budget worksheets, equipment, property maintenance reports, employee records. Those are 2 years.
And these policies are commonplace for most government agencies in the state of Idaho.
Absolutely, and all the documents are offered to the Idaho State Historical Society as part of the requirements of the code. They always decline to take the records, but,
Are you saying that we're not that interesting? I think the city has, I just wanted clarification so everyone could kind of understand what the difference between those is, and the city has something that's very, very similar.
yes, in
Not the
fact, we
same
looked
thing.
at the city's policy and the code side by side in drafting of this policy. I'm sure NIC has something similar as well.
Yes, very much so.
Perfect. Mr. Chair, I move that we approve resolution number 18-02, which is the destruction of semi-permanent and temporary public records.
Thanks for reading it all
I
the way.
will second that.
It's been seconded. All in favor?
I need a roll call, sir.
That's right. Roll call.
Commissioner Armand. Whitmire.
Yes.
Jordan.
Yes.
Garcia.
Yes.
Metz.
Yes.
Hoskins.
Yes?
Chapkus.
Yes.
English.
Yes.
Thank you.
The next item I have is the Atlas Mill Site Planning Project, the Welch Comer contract modification. I've invited Phil Boyd here to kind of visit with the board about this opportunistic endeavor. I've shared with you kind of a brief overview, and I think Phil will kind of walk you through what this opportunity is.
Okay, thank you, Tony. Thank you, Chairman Hoskins, board members. So, as Tony said, this is a little bit of an opportunistic endeavor. This is a topographic map of the site, which may not mean a lot to everyone, so I have other images that will be more interesting. But this particular area of the site, when we were doing the due diligence back in the summer of 2017, needed a significant amount of fill in order to make it more attractive for development. As you can see, there's quite a bit of relief in this area. So I'm going to zoom in on that particular area. So you can see how much topography here. This is an existing road that comes off of Celtice. It's about at a 2 or 3% grade, not bad. But you can see there's about 15 to 20 feet there. There's quite a number of holes in here. You can see there's several depressions in this area. So when we were doing that due diligence, we looked at the site and we're doing some earthwork, just very preliminary grading on it, and it turned out that there need to be quite a bit of fill in here. And you can see the relief that exists in this picture. Now, don't get confused by Mount Hink, because this is kind of above grade, but you can see Southeast Way over here. You can see that road I spoke of earlier, and then it comes down, and there's quite a bit of a hole in here. This is looking from the river back. This is the Prairie Trail, and there's about a 15-foot difference between that point, and then there's, as I mentioned, holes back in here. This is looking to the east, and again, you can kind of see quite a bit of topographic relief in there. This is what might be a future waterfront trailer in that very near vicinity. This is a kind of a composite. This is actually generated from topographic data and aerial photographs, and it gives us actually higher resolution topography, gives you a little easier way to look at some of the images in there. Or the image gives you a better opportunity to look at how much topography difference is there. So when we start to look at that, that's our starting point, and we say, well, gosh, what surface can we ultimately put in there? let me back up here and talk about those needs first before I show you. As I mentioned, we identified this in 2017. The estimated cost of that is somewhere between 2.3 and 5 million, depending on how much of Mount Hink goes away, how much we have to over excavate, and how much we have to import. So it was a substantial part of the cost, and it was one of the things that Tony and I really struggled with when we were working on the pro forma and the financial models, is how do you deal with that? Because it's not like you can ignore fixing that part of the site. It's necessary. During that time, we identified on the I-90 project, the subcontractor there is lowering portions of I-90 underneath the bridges because they need to increase the difference between the roadway and the bottom of the bridge to get the taller trucks through. And that contractor actually owns the material, and he is currently hauling it to another pit, and we contacted him and say, hey, what about another location? And he was very interested in that opportunity. He's got about 100 to 120,000 yards of material left from the I-90 project that is available. Tony Burns actually identified another set of, another source of material from the garage. There's about 20,000 yards that's available from the garage. Rough numbers, we can bring that into the site for about 840,000, which takes about $1.4 million off of this base price of 2.3 million. So that would probably get us just kind of right into a nice spot where we could grade that site out and make it more attractive for development. Tony and I went and sat down with Troy Tymonson, talked to him about this. Troy saw the value in being opportunistic and take advantage of this while we can. And I think is considering moving it through city council and seeing if there's funding available from the city to actual fund the earthwork part. But I think Troy wanted, or the city wanted, Ignite to consider funding the engineering part. What it would ultimately look like, and again, this is one of those computer models, which is a combination of topography and aerial photograph. That's what it looks like today. That's one scenario, what it might look like when we're completed. And that's just a scenario. It's not necessarily the scenario, because there would obviously have to be more work to go into figuring out exactly where that fill needs to be placed. Part of the challenge here is you don't want to paint yourself into a corner and do something that you might later regret. It could be what we do is fill in areas that there's no kind of a dispute that it would be the most appropriate place to structurally place the fill, which means it comes in, you dump, you spread it, you compact it, you get compaction test reports on it, and if a builder comes in, you can hand them the geotech report and say, here's the compaction test reports, similar to what Mike was talking about earlier. If we don't need a place for all of it, we may stockpile some of it up here, because when Mount Hink goes away, and perhaps we excavate out some of the unsuitable material there, we'll still need import fill. And getting import fill for free, stockpiled, is cheaper than paying for it. So those are the kind of two scenarios that we envision. Here's just a couple of other images, and I threw these in here primarily because it's sometimes difficult to understand what a site would look like prior to and after. And this is another computer model of it. You can see some of these big holes here. This is Mount Hink back in here. And again, that might be what it looks like when it's finished. It looks flat, but it's not necessarily flat. Here it's still at about a 12% grade. Over here it's a couple percent. And that's kind of the shape of the fill. So to get to this point, here are the things that we would propose and have proposed in what's in the memo in your packet. Negotiate the final pricing with a contractor, because that's kind of the first step. If you can't get that completed, there's no point moving on to the following steps. If we can do that, complete the rough site grading, the permitting processes, which involves both the Idaho Transportation Department requirements, because this would be a repository for material coming off of one of their projects. So the standards are a little different. And then actually getting the fill placed in there, doing some construction staking, construction observation. That's the price tag for that work. County permitting fees, because the site is still in the county. Estimate those at about $2,000. And then the testing and engineering for compaction testing. This is different from what's in your memo. I had originally ballparked it at $7,500 as I got the geotech involved, and we started talking to the contractors about the time frame and the extent. I missed it by half, so I apologize for that. So the total fees on a project like this would be $110,000 is what would be necessary to move this initiative forward. So a lot of information and glad to answer questions.
Can you explain, please, to the viewers, why can't we just move Mount Hink into those holes?
Good question. Actually, Mount Hink came from that hole. So a prior developer started to do work in here. This was the log yard. And so the material was moved out of here and up into Mount Hink.
So it's unsuitable for fill?
Yes, it's a mixture of wood and gravel. And on a separate initiative that will probably be back next month, we're working with DEQ to team up on some exploratory work up there, again, as a cost-saving measure, because they're doing some work. We can piggyback on them and take advantage of what they're going to do out there. So we've been working with Steve Gill, who you guys have met before, who's been really great to work with.
Thanks.
Bill, do you have any idea of a location where you could move that material that's in Mount Hink at a relatively decent cost basis without getting super expensive?
Yes, we do. And one of the things that's part of our next initiative is characterizing that material. And if you all remember, in the BLM Four Corners Master Plan, the western end of that was a park called La Crosse Park. We had to name it something. It's not the official name. Don't want to get any trouble with anybody. It's just something we have to name it because La Crosse comes into it. That's a big flat site, and it may actually have structural soils underneath it. But if it's going to eventually be a park, you can imagine that it would have rolling topography in it that could settle a little bit, and it wouldn't matter. That's one place where this material might go, and that's something we've been talking with Tony about, talking with DEQ about, and figuring out how we might do that, perhaps fund it through a brownfield program, just trying to chase all these rabbits to see where we might be able to cost effectively take that unsuitable material.
There's a lot of material there, so.
It's about 200,000 yards.
So it is, okay.
200,000.
So just timeline question, can any of this, I guess, can't happen before closing in May, or?
Good point. Good question. So the garage material will become available in mid-February. The I-90 material will become available in mid-April. And it will take between mid-April and end of August for the I-90 material to be moved. That work occurs at night. And so the answer is closing probably would need to be accelerated. Tony and I talked to Troy about that, and he again said, if this looks like it's a viable thing, that would be part of the discussion for council is, one, do you want to close early? And two, do you want to spend some money to purchase this fill material and place it? But the first step is here, I think, is what Troy asked, is does the Ignite Board want to consider funding this piece of work because it's relevant to the next piece
Bill,
of work?
the moving forward now saves the 1.4 million, right, by escalating the closing?
Correct, or, and I shouldn't make it sound as simple as that. The other option is to do nothing and leave the site in a, we'll call it maybe less than desirable condition. And I think, as we all know, the objective here is to dispose of that site in a public-private partnership and get that it being an economic generator. So the things that you can do to enhance it and be able to move that piece of property onto into a productive piece of property, this would move into that fits in that category. We had thought that from the beginning when we were working on the initial models. We still believe that. It's got to be improved. And as far as we can tell, this is the most economical way to do it. And save a big chunk of money. The option would be to do nothing, though, and allow the developer to deal with it when he acquires the property at that time.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor?
Phil, when you said negotiate pricing, so who are you negotiating? Negotiating that with the contractor? And then the second part would be, if they didn't take it here, where would they take it?
So currently, so the first part of the question is, yes, we would be negotiating with the I-90 contractor. And the things we would negotiate, and this is the reason I pulled this picture back up, is you can see, but maybe it's a little bit hard to see, but there's actually trees growing in here. Because when it was stripped in 2010, since then, trees have been growing and there's organic material. All that organic material needs to be stripped off before we can level it out and place it. That adds to his cost. But that's one of those things where you have to sit and negotiate with him. We have to negotiate where the placement's going to go, his means and methods, write a specification for him. So there's quite a few details to get through on that part. We would negotiate with the I-90 contractor and the garage contractor to get the unit pricing to a point where we think is cost-effective, or what is appropriate here, considering the material they already own, and they were depositing it. One, on the I-90 contractor is taking it up north to the pit off of Kathleen, and the garage contractor was taking it out to a site in, I think, near State Line. He planned to reuse it on another project, but we think we can get it. This would shorten his haul up, which is a positive thing for him.
So is the I-90 contractor then paying to dispose of that dirt?
No, I'm not sure what his contract is currently under his current, if he has a tipping fee with it at his current site. I don't know.
Okay.
And some of that's immaterial to us. If we can get it for the price that we've estimated here, it would still be very cost effective, more cost effective than I've moved dirt in a very long time. Long time, ever, maybe.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
So is this proposal only predicated upon getting the approval from the contractor that they will accept your bid?
Yes, I think that when I laid out that, the scope here, or the process here, we've got to start down this path. And what Tony and I talked about is show the board the entire expense that would be associated with this effort from Ignite's side. So we start out right up here, the first thing. So under the assumption that Ignite approves this budget, we start out with negotiating the final price, the scope of work with the contractor. And if we come to a point that doesn't make financial sense, we would just stop and very little expense would be incurred. There's some detail in the memo.
I saw that.
Yeah, so there's a few $1,000s worth of expenses occurred. And it's just incremental. The next point would be to get into the rough grading plans and chase the permits. And if we get hung up with a permit for some reason, which is always possible, and I should throw out that cautionary tale or point here, if we get hung up with a permit, we would just stop, and it would be unfortunate. But we've done a lot of preliminary work on this. We think we've got a good path planned forward, made lots of contacts with the agencies, and we wouldn't bring it forward if we hadn't done that work. And so it moves in that fashion, is incrementally more expensive or more investment as you go.
It is all contingent, though, on the early closing, isn't it?
Probably. Yeah, and all of this work would also be contingent on city council approving it, because council may say, gosh, we don't want to go spend $840,000 and we don't want to close early. But I think Tony's strategy is let's develop a plan. Tony and Troy was let's develop a very coherent story and probably a compelling reason to go do this.
Bill, what do you think the margins of variation are for any of the negotiating with the contractors or even the compaction testing? Do you think it's a $10,000 difference if?
The number
Wondering if you come back to us in a month saying, oh, it's going to be $10,000 more. I mean, is it more possible that?
These numbers here are fixed, so I would say that Ignite's numbers are fixed.
Okay.
Yeah, so the compaction testing, that was the one that I had estimated. The reason that it changed is once we got on the ground with the contractor and we started talking about his means and methods, the compaction testing got higher because he'll be on the site much longer. He's only hauling about 4,000 yards a night. And so we went through his means and methods, made sure our compaction testing folks didn't have to be there at night, because you obviously have to pay a premium for that, and work through some of those details. But from Ignite's perspective, these fees would not increase. The negotiations between the contractor for the cost of the material, placing it and compacting it, it might be, if it's $1 a yard difference, I would be surprised. We've estimated this at about $6 a yard I shouldn't have said that on TV, because, which doesn't, but I brought it to you kind of on the high side.
Okay.
And we would anticipate negotiating lower, down to that. Because at the end of the day, this just boils down to time of labor, time of equipment, and a fair margin to the contractor. And I've been negotiating these long enough that I would be able to have an idea that my client wasn't getting a fair deal, and I would just leave it up to the client at that point and say, you either are or are not. But both of the contractors see this as a good opportunity for them. It's a nice site to take it to, and they also see kind of the, I don't know if community value is the appropriate term, but they see that they're doing something good and helping a community site, and both of them are local contractors and good people to work with.
How do those trucks get to the site from I-90?
What we would probably do is, well, it would come down, let me get the right picture.
They won't be driving on that new pavement, will they?
They will drive on maybe a little portion of it, but they would come in from probably this direction, and there's a turn right there they would come in that direction, come through, and go back out that same direction. There'll be a little bit of, you can see the apartment complex down here. I'm warning the mayor and council member English now, so when they start getting the phone calls, when the work happens at night in here, we've admonished the contractor about the backup beepers. And so we actually worked out a route where the backup beepers would be minimal. You're always going to have a little bit, but that can really be detrimental to neighbors.
So, do they need to get rid of this fill bad enough it's essentially free except for truck time? Or are they trying to sell it to us because they have other uses for it?
No, essentially what the city would be paying for would be the spreading once it hits the ground and the compaction of it. The truck time, the tipping of it, and the material itself, we're not paying for. And that was one of the discussions we had with them is, kind of preliminarily representing the client. We're prepared to pay for spreading and compaction. We're not prepared to pay for the dirt or the trucking time. And that's what makes it so cost effective. And those guys get it. And it's
Right.
still an advantage to them because their haul is shorter and they're making a difference on a big project.
Yeah, a lot of times it's as big of a problem getting rid of fill as it is bringing fill.
Yeah, unfortunately, both of those or fortunately, whichever way you want to look at it, they have a site for both of them,
Oh.
so.
So Tony, if we choose to do this, where's the money coming from? This is unbudgeted.
Well, we're probably going to have to amend the budget.
Mr. Chair, I have a question too, when you're done. I'm struggling, I guess, a little bit with the idea of agreeing to pay $110,000 when we've said that our role in the partnership with the city on the Atlas Mill site is still very undefined, and agreeing to pay $110,000 for soil bringing in. So I understand the cost savings, and I really am definitely one as a finance person to embrace cost savings whenever possible. But when we have a very undefined role still in this overall project, and then agreeing to a contract of up to $110,000 when our role is still undefined, I struggle with that as a steward of these funds. I think, the difference between the task 1 and task 2, as Mr. Boyd explained, that there are these points through which, and I guess, based on the outline, I'm very comfortable with, I guess, taking a risk of sorts at the task 1 level through this process, but the point at which we start incurring the larger fees for the engineering services when our role in this overall project is still not defined is difficult for me as a finance person, even balanced against the overall savings that we're going to get. So I have to say that. Well, not just to the executive director, but to the rest of the board. considering approving this.
Further discussion? Can you bring up the total again, please?
So does this still need to go to the council and be worked out? I mean, I'm kind of curious how the council feels about it. So
Well,
that-
from our conversation with Troy and Phil, that Troy was optimistic that the council would embrace the conversation of saving over $1 million on this initiative, knowing how tight it's been and the challenges we faced over the past year trying to rationalize this. He's confident that they will look at it very closely and objectively, but he was encouraging for us to go ahead and proceed to see if this organization would be willing to kind of help out on the partnership side of funding some of the preliminary costs.
And if the council doesn't agree, then the only thing we have invested is the time we spent tonight discussing it.
Or how far Phil gets down the road before council acts.
We would need, one of the things that needs to start happening quickly is the environmental part of it, because we've got to get the biologist and the other things that are necessary because of the ITD fill material. So we've got to start that work immediately. But again, the investment isn't, near that. You're going to be into it $5,000 or $6,000 by the time I think we get into city council. And at that point, if council says stop, that work still isn't wasted. It's literally set aside, and you could transfer it to a future developer or a future city project.
And what's the environmental testing going to do? Is that going to tell if there could be, oils or so forth from the fill that could leach into the water, or is it going to tell what kind of soil, or?
The ones that DEQ is doing, or the ones that I'm describing?
The kind that you said could cost $5,000 or $6,000 that
Oh.
you have to get going right away.
Yeah, that's an environmental clearance where we need to go through and look at, it's not associated with soil contaminations. Enough work has been done on the site, and there's more work being done, but our work is primarily related to satisfying DEQ that we're not destroying any habitat. I mean, ITD, that we're not destroying any habitat. And as you guys can see from those pictures, there's not much habitat there. It's just a big stripped site.
Both lines.
Yeah, and that's the environmental work that we would be doing. There's some archaeological work as well, clearing it with SHPO, the State Historic Preservation Office. No.
Mr. Mayor?
Mr. Chairman, I understand Sarah's point because we're kind of looking down the road and big picture without having some of the other parts of it in focus. So I don't know what your time frame is in starting this work. I know Troy is going to come back and make a presentation probably at the first meeting in February that will probably answer some of the questions and concerns that you have, bringing in the whole financing picture more in focus. And then it'll also give the council an opportunity to weigh in on this proposal and whether they support it. So, Phil, if it's approved pending that approval, is that something that works for you, or when do you need to get started on this? We do have a deadline because the garage material needs to be brought in February.
Correct, and the garage material isn't subject, interestingly, to the environmental rules like the I-90 material is. So for the I-90 stuff, we need to get going immediately because that process just takes so long. As the mayor is alluding to a little bit, in a parallel path, there's the master planning effort that we're working on, that Tony and I are working on, the community visioning work that's going on. All those things are coming together. In a perfect world, this wouldn't be occurring now. Your point is completely understandable. On the other hand, as I mentioned to Tony, I couldn't pass up the opportunity to at least explain it to him so the board could say, gosh, we love it, or city council could say, we love it, but we're just not prepared for it. And we just can't take the opportunity at this time, which is fine. I just didn't want the opportunity to pass by without the decision makers having a say in whether they wanted to pass it by or not. But we would need to start on the environmental work like tomorrow, literally tomorrow.
Does it make sense to appropriate the 5,000 or 6,000 for this environmental review work if we can get some other value of it? If this doesn't work at the council, then we wait till, I guess we could be our next board meeting to decide whether to do the big part of
We
this.
limit the scope of the work to the environmental right now until approval
Yeah,
through
he
city
says they
council.
need to do that really bad right now. So, and get the ball rolling. So if that's, there's always a catch on these things, you know, when we say, well, could we wait a while? There's always a catch why we can't. So do we look at doing that? Do we feel, I mean, does it seem like the council may want to go this way? So is it worth maybe investing 5,000 or 6,000 to do that so that the ball can get rolling? And you said there's probably things that would apply to anyway later, so it wouldn't be wasted. I could see approving something like that. I share your concern about, you know, just approving the whole thing right now. So I'm just throwing that out there.
Oh, sorry. You guys raised your hands first.
Go ahead, Sarah.
I would be amenable to creating some kind of, as you suggested, Brad, creating some kind of tiered or stepped contract or separating out the pieces that would align better with the process of Ignite's involvement in the project itself, or as Brad suggested, pieces that kind of are more immediate, that have the lower value from a cost standpoint. Is that something that could be done?
I think with what Commissioner Jordan said, yes, if I understand what your point is, based on the schedule Tony and I worked out, Ignite's involvement in this project won't be clear until June or July.
Okay.
And at that point, the opportunity, or a portion of the opportunity, will have been missed.
Okay.
And, yeah, because it's just by the time we get enough of the financial land use planning, cost estimating, financial models, and come forward with enough data. That's my thought, Tony. I don't know if you share the
Right, you
same.
know, I don't envision our plans being approved by city council probably till early fall. I mean, it's just going to take that long through the process before we have that area under our umbrella, if it all, goes as planned.
And we anticipate being in front of the board with preliminary product in that June timeframe, I think, because obviously it's a give and take process for what we do and what the board wants to shape into your final plan. We didn't want to just show up with kind of a final product without your opportunity to comment on it.
Dan?
Of course, we don't know what the whole project's going to look like, and there's this whole thing of, well, it's going to be a mix of, public, private, and development and park space. So I guess in my mind, that big open flat space, does it make any difference down the road if it ends up a chunk of that becomes park space versus, building sites? Or would you need to kind of do this anyway?
The answer is, it does make a difference, and this is where we are a little parallel pathed instead of sequential like this. In a perfect world, we would have all the land use plan figured out, and then we would strategically say, this is going to be park, doesn't have to be great material, this is going to be a building, it needs to be structural material. I think we can say with a pretty high level of confidence that this particular area will be some sort of vertical construction and not a park. Because the areas that lend themselves to the park are the waterfront and areas that have more unsuitable material. And when you take those two out of the 47 acres, there's not much left. And this is one of the areas that I think we can say with pretty high confidence, it's going to be some sort of saleable product, which is why we chose it for the earthwork portion of it. When we actually get to city council, we'll probably have a little better idea about the land use plan so we can provide council a little more certainty, because I think the trepidation that this board is showing over 110,000, you can imagine when we get in front of city council and Troy says we want to spend $800,000, the trepidation will be substantial there.
Yes, I can imagine.
Yes, you could imagine. Yes, you can. And so we want to wade into it carefully and provide the decision makers sufficient information. And I think the proposal that Commissioner Jordan had, I attempted to write our scope of work a little like that in the back of my mind, and we could simply craft the final contract that way, where the tasks were released once the prior task was successful, and ultimately, we don't really get into the details until city council says they're willing to move forward with the project, just to minimize the expenditure, and then we'll preserve the product that was created, because we'll probably use it at some point in the next couple years.
Mick, you had your hand up.
So Tony, at what point in time do you think we will start having, I know you and Troy have been working together with Phil to start laying out timelines here. It looks like the closing is going to be in May. Is that correct, Mayor? Is that still?
That's what
Is that
it's
the,
contracted to now.
that's tentative? So sometime between now and May, we have to figure out the exact details of the purchase contract and how that's going to be funded. But we also start to look at these kind of opportunities that are going to continue to come along. And sir, I totally agree with what you're saying, but I also know the reality that the city is going to acquire this property with all likelihood. And we're going to be in partnership with the city going forward in the development of this property. And I know the sequence is not perfect here, but once again, if it's $1 million opportunity, you don't turn those down very often. And I totally agree that $110,000 just to say, let's move forward without knowing the sequence and who's going to be responsible for all the funding is something that's kind of, we're taking a little bit of a leap of faith here. But that said, I think we do need to continue to move forward, but we also need to be cognizant that we've got 3 months or 4 months now between today and the time this closes to start really assessing who's going to be responsible for what costs. I know the city expects us to be a participant in this, and how we do that is going to have to start getting fleshed out pretty soon. Because right now, you're right, we don't know what our role's going to be and what our costs are going to be, but we know we're going to be involved.
Right.
So, that said, I would approve this with the idea that it's just the first step of many before we see what the final cost is going to be on this whole project.
It's a great idea and muchly appreciated, though. I have a question on, this is not an urban renewal district, and how do we spend money in it?
This would be in the River District.
Pardon?
This would be in the River District right here.
What is it today? It's county, correct?
Correct.
How do we spend money in the county?
Good question.
Well, what the current contract we have with Welch Comer is for planning in this area. So we have a planning contract in this area, and we have the latitude to do that. So this would be an expansion of that with them more planning on how to handle, the way I understand, how to handle this material. We wouldn't be touching anything yet at this time until if the city decides to go ahead and agree to allow that parking garage material to start moving into the site or being stockpiled out there along the Southeast Way area. So
Tony, what portion of that land is in the River District currently?
none of it,
I thought there was a portion that was.
not of the Atlas Mill site.
Okay.
Some of it's in the
Oh,
lake.
I apologize. There's a skinny little piece that's in the Lake District down
This piece.
there.
That's the only piece?
Yeah,
Okay.
that's the only piece. So there's nothing really in the River District.
Okay.
So the sand from the parking garage isn't going to get put here prior to close of escrow, it's going to get stockpiled.
But that's the idea. I mean, it's an opportunity. So if the.
I'm just asking.
Yeah, I mean,
Right.
that's the opportunity at hand. So we have this material that can be got at below market rate, and if Phil's expectations are right, we're going to have to buy that at market rate sooner or later. Somebody's going to have to, the city or us.
Right.
And it's going to be a lot more expensive. So that's why it's being proffered.
I would just ask, and we don't have to worry about getting permission to dump this fill before close of escrow. It's going to be on other property we own.
No.
It's going to be on her property.
Well, that's the whole idea, if that makes sense, if it can be worked out.
If it can close,
That's
they would probably have to accelerate the closing or get permission to place it there.
Yeah. Okay. All
And
right,
and
so
again,
that's-
which goes back to this sequential presentation of where you only want to go do enough work to have the opportunity to do the next step. But particularly the environmental stuff, if we don't start in the environmental stuff, I know we won't get the I-90 material because there's other people involved in that process at the state level.
And we talked about even bringing this forward. I mean, if it was $100,000 or $150,000, it probably wouldn't be worth the effort of really exploring this opportunity. But for $1.4 million, I think it's definitely a topic of conversation for this organization and the city council to weigh in, whether you choose to or not to. At least you had the opportunity to discuss it.
What seems like maybe the compromise right now is to approve, I hate to say 5,000 or 6,000 all the time, I can't remember what the number was. We approve that so they can do this environmental and keep this rolling and make this work, but we don't have to do the rest of it until we see how the council takes Troy's presentation and so forth. Is that correct? Is that kind of the conservative way to do it?
Is
Keep the ball rolling?
You can
is Troy presenting in February?
I don't know Troy's
plan.
plan. Is that his plan?
Yeah.
Steve?
So I was just going to say, if we go back to this, we talk about the total investment, the number 840,000 plus the 100,000, right? So roughly
Right.
$950,000. Well, if that was spent, you're saying that a $950,000 investment now adds 2.4 at a minimum of value to the property.
Correct.
So if whatever happens with that property, we've enhanced the value of that property by $2.4 million by spending $950. So if we spend that money, the hope is that all of that will be recaptured, plus.
Right, and just to make sure, yeah, that's correct, on the 2.3 million.
2.3, yeah.
Brad?
Okay. Just a question, I mean, are we saying that would generate 2.3 million in value, or it would save 2.3 million in bringing in fill? So it may not add that much to the value. It could add more to the value. But you're saying we're saving 2.3 million of bringing fill in. It really, the value of the land is a different function, but we're making it more usable and desirable, and we're adding to the value. But the 2.3 million isn't a hard number we're adding to the value, because the value is a market-driven thing.
Right,
I
we're-
thought we were saving 1.4 million, which is the 2.3 minus the 950 that we're spending.
Correct,
Is that correct?
yes.
Okay.
That's just assuming that we were going to pay for that work.
That we were going to pay for the fill.
Right.
Yeah, we're
right.
saving
It
all
could-
that.
It could have been someone that purchases the ground is going to pay $2.3 million to that. If you just sold it as is right today, those people, in your estimation, would have to spend $2.3 million to bring that in. So whatever they're going to pay for that piece of property would be, there's 2.3 million that they have to spend. You're saying that we're going to do that for them.
Correct, or they wouldn't spend the money at all, and you would end up with something that may not be completely desirable or harder to sell, I think, would be the site. And I think you guys, just thinking about sites that you've looked at that are developed, when you drive through, there's a road there and there's pads, or the ability to put a road in, versus you look at a site like that and the challenges associated with working from scratch from a site like that will make it more challenging to sell.
You're definitely adding desirability and value to it by doing this. No doubt about that. So, I agree, there's a big cost savings here. I'm not saying don't do it, I'm just saying to go forward, we don't have to appropriate the 100,000 right now and amend the budget. All we have to appropriate is 5,000 or 6,000 for the environmental research. And then February, March, April, somewhere after this goes through council, we can decide about the other part, or find out what the city council wants us to do. But this
Without a
gets the
motion.
ball rolling so he doesn't lose the opportunity to get the fill from lowering the freeway.
And from the.
What number would you be comfortable with if we wanted to proceed forward?
I would, because I'm shooting from the hip here, I'm thinking if we were in the $7,500 range, and I think we can do it whichever the way the board likes it. I had attempted to set it up so it was obvious that it was a sequential event, because there's no point in moving forward to step 2. The board can either say, we're going to authorize it, write your contract that way, and you do it that way, or just authorize $7,500. We'll still write the contract that way, and we'll come back in February. And And if we end up in a situation where we need to keep working to hit some deadlines, and it's work that hasn't been authorized, we're going to keep working, just because we don't want to miss the opportunity to do it. And then we would come back almost for a post-authorization, but at least the board has in front of them the entire picture of costs on it. But I think if we were at $7,500, we would start on that and get our environmental, get our county permits, do the site grading work, a little bit of that, enough to get the permit going.
So you have $9,500 on here as task one. Is that what you're talking about?
Well, like I told you, I'm shooting from the hip, standing up here. We would be looking at, that portion of the work, yeah, you're right, the SWIP was, we have to develop a base SWIP for the site, just so the acronym stands for Stormwater Pollution Prevention Plan. We have to develop a base SWIP for the site, and then we develop satellite ones for each of the projects. So we would be into it, 9,500.
Well, it's dangerous shooting from the hip.
I know, it is. 12, 5, 13. Yeah, well, actually, we'd be into it about 20, now that I'm sitting here looking at it, in 8,500. So you're into it 28,000. Shouldn't shoot from the hip, Commissioner Jordan.
To get to square one,
Yeah.
okay? So that's the minimum buy-in.
Let me back up on that. Yeah, because it does get, we're getting a little out of sequence here. And this is why I was thinking this. The SWIP takes some time to develop, but I'm not certain that that is a precursor to the environmental permit processing with ITD. I'm not sure. We just have to have it before construction, before we actually start moving earth. So if we're not moving earth until April, I think it would be, we still wouldn't be into it more than $7,500. Because we can do some of those things later. It's the environmental part, getting our biologist on the ground, getting the SHPO clearance, doing enough site grading that we can show what the proposed plan is. The subsequent permits, the county permit and the SWIP permit can come later. So I go backwards and I stay with the 7,500.
Well, we'll be here again in February.
Exactly. And we'd have more of a story. And we would know from council whether we're going to continue forward.
You can never tell about those council people. You never know what they'll do.
That's for sure.
So Mick, does that accomplish what you're thinking if we start out at the $7,500?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be incremental. We know that.
Right.
We know it's going to continue to build upon itself. So, yeah, that's fine.
So I would make a motion to approve $7,500 to start this process.
I'll second it.
Phil, could you describe once again that process?
So
To address environmental, biological?
Yeah, it would be the, I think we could, we'll call it the environmental, the biological, the SHPO clearances, and the county permitting process. Because those are the things that will take some time.
Okay.
Moved and seconded. Further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Just on a final note, I just want to thank Phil for his creative ideation. I mean, he definitely thinks out of the box, and it makes everybody uncomfortable, which is good, to kind of have these conversations. But this is some heck of opportunities dealing with a very unique site out there, so I just wanted to
No, thanks.
thank you for that.
Yeah, and I understand it is a challenge, and I totally appreciate all your observations. I felt the same way, which is why Tony and Troy and I spent some time thinking about it and trying to put together some logic that the board would have something to consider, as the council will need to as well. So we'll get to visit this again here in a couple of weeks.
Well, I think we all want the best for this site because it is very unique. It's a huge, unique opportunity, and I think we all also know we're going to be in a partnership with the city when this comes to fruition, so thanks.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Phil.
Mr. Chairman, just a few initiative updates. Performing Arts Center feasibility study. As you recall, the board agreed to the HBS Convention, Sports, and Entertainment Facilities Consulting Contract last board meeting. I'm working with Nicole Kaler at CDA 2030 to get that contract in place. The contract's been reviewed by Danielle's team, and a few comments were shared, and it's in the hands of HVS, so we hope to execute that contract soon. So that's moving forward. Atlas Mill Site Planning Project, I think we probably had a fairly good conversation on that as right now. Memorial Park and North Park Drive subdivision, things are kind of moving forward. If you go over there, you see our signs up for our lot sales. The berm work is being done and being improved as opportunities present themselves over the winter. We are, hopefully going to receive bids on all 10 lots over the next month as that time frame comes in. We've run ads in the paper, in the Coeur d'Alene Press. I don't know if you've seen them, trying to get that word out, and hopefully we'll have a good response.
It's an article in the Spokesman Review also.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yes, sir.
Is your phone number anywhere? I didn't see it on the sign. Is it
Your cell phone
practical
is,
to have your phone? Well, I'm just wondering if people have questions.
Oh, yeah, it's on our website.
Okay,
We drive them to the website where all the information is.
all right.
The Southeast Way Road revitalization, all the lanes are open. They're waiting for winter to be over, and they'll get back into finishing up that project this spring. The railroad right-of-way surplus sale on east of Beebe, where we just have Danielle's team provided me with the latest update to the PSA that we'll get back to Active West. We are going to enter into an agreement with Idaho Department of Environmental Quality to clean up our right-of-way that's east of Beebe Boulevard. They've agreed to do that for us as part of the condition of the sale. We're not quite sure what the cost is, but DEQ has the funds to do that, and so now we're working on a time frame. The Ignite at Riverstone, formerly referred to as Topher Lane, we're still trying to figure out how best to evaluate that potential partnership project with the city, trying to figure out different ways of approaching the project since access off Tilford Lane looks to not be available. So we're trying to strategize about what type of product and access can exist if those two railroad corridors are combined. So that process is still underway, still thinking through that. And that's all I have, Mr. Chairman.
And I think people have noticed that at the Memorial Park, the new street signal lights are on up there on Northwest Boulevard, and they're continuing to work in the county's parking area. So,
Question, Mr. Chairman. The restoration of Memorial Stadium, do we have any kind of a preliminary timetable for that?
Yes, we do. So that is under the auspices of Bill Greenwood at the city. Bill is putting out an RFQ for that process. I think he has issued it or will issue it here shortly, and seek designers for that project here in the next couple of months and then move that project forward. So it is underway.
Thank you.
that's it?
That's it.
Now it's time for the board commissioner comments. Any board commissioner comments?
Mr. Chair, I just wanted to say that on Saturday night, believe it or not, they had over 1,500 people that enjoyed the Mac and Cheese Fest downtown, and they really called in the expert judges, and Tony was one of the expert judges and participated in. You probably had more mac and cheese, Tony, that night than you've ever had in your whole entire life.
True statement.
But
Still skinny looking.
Yeah, but I wanted to thank Tony for participating in that, and it was a first-time event, as in first-time events, when you have way more people than you think, you run out of stuff. But I think everybody was happy. Jim Chapkus was another volunteer down there, but it was a great event, and they're already planning for next year's event, so
I
thank
think
you.
it was closer to 2,200 people.
Oh, it was.
I think we did 1,500 or 1,800 advanced sales and another 300 on site. It was hot.
Yeah.
It was a good event.
Is that the Downtown Association?
Downtown Association, yeah. It was a good event.
So anyway, I just wanted to thank Tony and Jim for their participation in that.
Excellent.
Do you have to say people down in Moscow were coming up here for it?
Yeah.
It was
It was
good. It was
good.
the buzz all over, yeah.
It was a lot of fun.
Mac and Cheese Festival.
I think Tap House won the Golden Noodle Award. for the best mac and cheese.
Nice.
Yeah.
Any other board commissioner comments? Thank you for that. Public comment. Any other public comment? Now I'll entertain a motion to enter executive session under Idaho Code Section 74-206, subsection 1C, to acquire an interest in real property which is not owned by a public agency.
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded.
Roll call.
Metz?
Yes.
Harmon?
Yes.
Whitmire?
Yes.
Jordan?
Yes.
English?
Yes.
Garcia?
Yes.
Hoskins?
Yes.
Chapman?
Yes.
And that's a wrap.